What if I told you that some of the biggest breakthroughs you use every single day, your Wi-Fi connection, your flight safety, even the money in your wallet, weren't American at all? In fact, they were born in Australia. Yet somehow, the credit got swallowed up, claimed, or quietly overshadowed by America. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, that's the story we're diving into today. Before we unpack the shocking legal battles, the billion-dollar corporate fights, and the sneaky trademark tricks, let's start where it all began. The genius inventions Australians created that the world relies on, and often thinks came from somewhere else. Quick challenge for you. As you're watching, drop a comment with the invention you think Americans most unfairly claimed as their own. I'll be checking the comments to see who guesses right. Australia has always had this reputation of being laid back, easygoing, maybe even a little isolated from the rest of the world. But here's the twist. Isolation breeds innovation. When you don't have every resource or every company at your fingertips, you figure things out yourself. And Australians? They've been quietly figuring things out in ways that shaped the modern world. Let's start with one of the biggest, Wi-Fi. Almost everyone thinks of Silicon Valley when they hear wireless internet. Apple, Intel, Cisco, big US names, right? But the truth is, the CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency, cracked the hardest part of Wi-Fi in the 1990s. They figured out how to make wireless signals bounce around obstacles indoors without collapsing into useless noise. That's the backbone of what you're using right now. Yet when the world talks about Wi-Fi, America's companies usually take the spotlight. And it's not just Wi-Fi. Think about air travel. Every commercial flight you've ever taken depends on something called the black box, or flight data recorder. Guess where that came from? Not Boeing, not the FAA. It was invented by an Australian scientist named David Warren. He thought, what if we could record everything happening in a plane's cockpit so that if disaster struck, we'd have answers? A simple, brilliant idea that changed aviation safety forever. Or how about the bionic ear? An invention that gave the gift of hearing to people who were completely deaf. That was Australian scientist Graham Clark. His cochlear implant became one of the most life-changing medical devices of the 20th century. Yet how often do you see that celebrated in Hollywood movies or written in US headlines? Rarely. Even your cash might have Australian roots. Ever notice that some banknotes around the world are made of plastic polymer, not paper? That innovation came straight out of Australia, developed by the Reserve Bank and CSIRO. Today it's used in over 20 countries because it's safer, longer-lasting, and nearly impossible to counterfeit. So why don't you hear these stories more often? Why do so many people automatically assume Wi-Fi or flight safety tech or cutting-edge implants came from America? It comes down to two things: marketing power and narrative control. The US has long dominated the global media and tech storytelling game. Whoever tells the story often gets the credit. And Australia, for decades, has quietly built world-changing inventions while letting others grab the spotlight. By the way, let me know in the comments, have you ever used one of these Aussie inventions without realizing it? Wi-Fi, black box, bionic ear, polymer money, which one surprised you most? But here's where it gets messy. It's one thing to be overshadowed. It's another to have your invention directly claimed or even legally trademarked by someone else. And when it comes to Australia versus America, that battle has played out in courtrooms, in billion-dollar deals, and even in the shoes on your feet. Because the Wi-Fi story wasn't just about recognition, it turned into a full-blown war. And the details will blow your mind. You're watching this video right now because of Wi-Fi. But here's a secret most people don't know. For years, the very Wi-Fi chip inside your laptop or phone was illegally using Australian technology, without paying for it. Sounds wild, right? Let me explain. Back in the 1990s, the CSIRO, that's Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, made a breakthrough. They solved the multipath problem. Basically, Wi-Fi signals inside a building would bounce off walls, ceilings, and floors. The result? A scrambled mess of noise. CSIRO's team cracked the code to clean it up, making fast, reliable wireless connections possible. That invention was so critical, they patented it. Now here's where things get crazy. While CSIRO quietly filed their patent, US companies were busy building the booming wireless industry. Intel, HP, Dell, Microsoft, Apple, everyone was racing to put Wi-Fi in every device. Billions of dollars were on the line. But the thing is, all of those devices depended on CSIRO's patented technology. So what did the companies do? They used it anyway. For years, American corporations shipped products built on Australia's invention, selling billions of devices worldwide, while CSIRO barely saw a cent. The Aussies had the paperwork, the proof, the patents, but they didn't have America's marketing machine or deep-pocketed lobbyists. And that's where the fight began. CSIRO launched lawsuits in U.S. courts, going head-to-head with the biggest tech giants on Earth. Imagine this: a mid-sized Australian government research agency dragging Intel, HP, Dell, Microsoft, and even America's mobile carriers into courtrooms, demanding billions in unpaid royalties. The reaction? U.S. companies tried everything to avoid paying. They argued the patent was too broad. They claimed it wasn't essential. They stalled, appealed, and pressured. Because if CSIRO won, it meant not just a slap on the wrist, it meant rewriting the financial history of wireless internet. But against all odds, CSIRO held its ground. One by one, settlements rolled in. Microsoft, HP, Dell, Intel, even America's biggest carriers, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, were forced to pay up. By 2012, CSIRO had earned over $430 million in royalties from its Wi-Fi patents. That's right, Australia had quietly beaten Silicon Valley at its own game. But here's the twist. Even though CSIRO won in court, most people still believe Wi-Fi is an American invention. The lawsuits barely made headlines outside Australia. And ask anyone in the US? They'll probably point to some Silicon Valley startup, not a Canberra-based research team. This is the frustrating reality. America might have lost in court, but it won in the court of public opinion. And credit? That's priceless. Quick poll. Do you think CSIRO should have pushed harder to brand Wi-Fi as an Australian invention worldwide? Or was getting the royalties enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious if people think money equals recognition, or if the story itself matters more. Now, if Wi-Fi was a billion-dollar fight, you might think Australia would get more respect for its innovations. But instead, the next battle came from something much simpler and much stranger. We're not talking high-tech. We're talking boots. And trust me, this one gets even messier. When you think of Australian, what comes to mind? Kangaroos, Vegemite, maybe surfing. But for millions of people worldwide, there's one symbol that screams Australia louder than anything else: the UGG boot. It's that cozy sheepskin boot you see everywhere, from celebrity Instagram posts to winter streetwear in New York. For Australians, UGGs have been around for decades. Farmers wore them, surfers slipped them on after hitting cold waves, and households across the country treated them like everyday footwear. They weren't a fashion statement. They were part of life. But here's where things took a shocking turn. In the 1970s, a U.S. company called Deckers Outdoor Corporation saw the growing popularity of these boots overseas. And what did they do? They trademarked the word UGG in the United States and dozens of other countries. Yep, you read that right. An American company trademarked the very name Australians had been using generically for decades. To Aussies, UGG was just the word for that type of sheepskin boot, like sneakers or flip-flops. But to Deckers, it became a protected brand. The result? Absolute chaos. Australian small businesses who'd been making and selling UGG boots for generations suddenly found themselves hit with legal threats. Export UGGs to America? You'd get sued. Sell them in Europe under that name? Deckers could stop you. Even though the boots were invented and popularized in Australia, a U.S. corporation now controlled the word. Imagine growing up with something so deeply woven into your culture, only to find out that someone else, not even from your country, now owned it in the eyes of international law. That's exactly how Aussies felt, and it wasn't just legal, it was cultural theft. The UGG boot wasn't just footwear, it was identity. It was the cold winter mornings, the sandy beaches, the backyards and bonfires. For many Australians, seeing UGGs marketed as a trendy U.S. fashion item, with celebrities in Hollywood acting like it was some cool American brand, that stung. One Australian manufacturer, UGG Imports Pty Ltd, even took Deckers to court, arguing that UGG was a generic Australian term and shouldn't be monopolized internationally. The fight dragged on for years, bouncing through courts and appeals. But the reality was harsh. Trademark law isn't about culture. It's about paperwork. And Deckers had filed it first in the right places at the right time. So in much of the world, UGG now belongs to Deckers. And that means if an Aussie bootmaker wants to export UGG boots under that name, they can't. Let me throw this to you. Do you think it's fair for a company to lock down the name of a cultural product that existed long before they trademarked it? Or is that just smart business? Drop your answer in the comments. I guarantee this one will split opinions. But here's the kicker. While Aussies were fighting to reclaim their boots, another lone Australian inventor was preparing to take on an even bigger enemy. Not a fashion brand, not even a retailer, but one of the most powerful tech companies in the history of the world. And this time, it wasn't just about recognition, it was about beating Microsoft in court. Picture this. You're a lone inventor, tinkering away in Australia, chasing an idea you believe could change the way technology works. You don't have Silicon Valley funding. You don't have a Fortune 500 company behind you. All you've got is an idea and a patent. That was Rick Richardson. In the early 1990s, Richardson developed technology that would later become the backbone of software anti-piracy protection. You know how when you install software, it often asks for a product key or checks that it's a legitimate copy? That whole concept of product activation, making sure software wasn't being pirated, was Richardson's brainchild, and he patented it. But here's where the story takes a wild turn. Fast forward to the 2000s, and Microsoft had rolled out its blockbuster operating systems, Windows, XP, Office, and more. They all used, you guessed it, product activation. Billions of dollars in revenue flowed through this system. The problem, Rick Richardson's company, Unilock, said Microsoft had used their patented technology without permission. Now, think about this for a second. You're an Australian inventor staring down one of the most powerful corporations on Earth. The same Microsoft that crushed competitors, dominated the software market, and had more lawyers than you could even imagine. Most people would say, don't even try, you'll get destroyed. But Rick Richardson wasn't most people. In 2003, Unilock sued Microsoft in a U.S. federal court, claiming patent infringement. For years, Microsoft denied it. They fought tooth and nail, arguing the patent wasn't valid, or that they hadn't really used it. Then, in 2009, the unthinkable happened. A jury sided with Richardson. Microsoft was ordered to pay $388 million in damages, the largest patent infringement award in U.S. history at the time. It was a moment of shock. A lone Aussie inventor had just beaten Microsoft in their own backyard. For a brief window, the world's headlines flashed with Richardson's name. Australia had struck again. Of course, Microsoft appealed, and the legal saga stretched on. Eventually, the damages were reduced, and the case shifted through endless legal wrangling. But the bigger picture was clear. An Australian inventor had proven that even the mightiest tech giant couldn't just brush him aside. This wasn't just about money, it was about validation. For years, Richardson had been mocked, doubted, even ignored. But in that courtroom, he proved his idea had value and that America's biggest company had leaned on his work. Let me ask you this. If you were in Richardson's shoes, would you have fought Microsoft, or would you have taken a quiet settlement to avoid the stress? I want to see how many of you would take on a Goliath versus how many would cash out early. But here's the bigger issue all these stories raise. Why does this keep happening? Why do Australian innovations, whether it's Wi-Fi, UGG boots, or software patents, end up overshadowed, claimed, or controlled by American companies? The answer isn't just about individual cases. It's about a pattern, and that pattern reveals a lot about how the world views innovation, power, and credit. Because when America isn't outright claiming inventions, it's often shaping the narrative so that people just assume the origin story starts in the US, and that's exactly what we need to talk about next. By now you've seen the pattern: Wi-Fi, UGG boots, Rick Richardson's patent. Again and again, Australian inventions either get ignored, claimed, or overshadowed by American companies. But here's the real question. Why does this keep happening? It's not random. There are a few powerful reasons why America often ends up with the spotlight, while Australia, despite its genius, gets sidelined. Reason 1. The marketing machine. America has something Australia doesn't: global marketing dominance. Think about Silicon Valley. It's not just a place, it's a story factory. Every tech breakthrough is hyped with press releases, flashy product launches, and Hollywood-level storytelling. Meanwhile, Australians, they're known for being modest, quiet achievers, the no-worries attitude. That's great for culture, but terrible for global branding. While Aussies invent, Americans promote. And in the world of invention, the person who tells the story often gets the credit. Reason 2, legal firepower. Another reason, trademarks and patents. America's companies are ruthless about locking down ownership on paper. Deckers trademarked UGG. U.S. firms tried to bury CSIRO in court with endless appeals. It's not that Australians don't file patents, but Americans play the legal game like chess grandmasters. They know that in international law, Whoever files first, files widest, and fights hardest usually wins. Reason 3. Media narratives. Let's be honest, when you think of innovation, your brain probably jumps to Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tesla. Why? Because American media tells those stories relentlessly. They glorify Silicon Valley founders like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk as global icons. Meanwhile, how many of you even knew David Warren's name before today? He invented the black box, the reason planes are safer. And yet, most people couldn't tell you a single fact about him. That's not because he wasn't brilliant. It's because Australia never had the same megaphone. Reason 4. Cultural bias. There's also an unspoken cultural bias. When an invention comes from America, the world tends to accept it as world-changing. When it comes from somewhere else, especially a smaller country, it gets treated as a curiosity. The US frames itself as the center of progress, and smaller nations often get cast as side notes. But here's the twist. Australia isn't alone. Many countries face this. Think of how countless European or Asian innovations get rebranded as American when they hit global markets. Australia just happens to have some of the most striking examples. Reason 5. Economics and power. At the end of the day, innovation isn't just about ideas. It's about money and muscle. The US has the world's largest economy, deepest venture capital markets, and most aggressive corporations. When they see a good idea, they don't just admire it. They move fast, scale it, and dominate the market. And in that rush, the original source often gets blurred or erased. Let me throw this to you. Do you think America is stealing credit on purpose, or is it just the natural result of being the world's loudest voice in tech and culture? Drop your answer below. I want to see if people think this is malicious or just systemic. But here's the kicker. All these forces don't just affect Australia's pride. They have real consequences, from billions in lost royalties to cultural erasure. And in some cases, Australia has fought back hard, while in others, the damage might be permanent. So, what does this all mean for the future of Australian inventions? And what lessons can be learned from these battles? That's exactly what we'll break down next. When you look at these stories side by side, Wi-Fi, Ugg boots, Rick Richardson's patent, it's easy to treat them as isolated dramas. But taken together, they reveal something bigger, the price of being overshadowed. So let's break down the real consequences of America claiming or dominating credit for Australian inventions. Consequence 1. Billions in lost recognition and revenue. CSIRO fought tooth and nail to claw back royalties from Wi-Fi. Yes, they eventually won over $430 million. But think about this. If they had been credited from the start, if every wireless device maker had paid licensing fees properly, the figure could have been in the billions. And the Ugg boot story? Deckers built a billion-dollar fashion empire by trademarking the name. Meanwhile, small Aussie businesses, who'd been making these boots long before, struggled to sell under the same label. That's not just lost money. That's lost opportunity for hundreds of local families and communities. Consequence 2. Cultural erasure. This one stings even more. The Ugg boot wasn't just footwear. It was a piece of Australian identity. When Deckers trademarked it, they didn't just take a name. They took the narrative. Suddenly, global consumers thought Ugg was an American brand. Imagine being Australian, seeing something so rooted in your lifestyle, and realizing the rest of the world doesn't even know its true origin. The same happens with Wi-Fi. Ask the average American where Wi-Fi came from, and you'll probably hear Silicon Valley. Australia doesn't even enter the conversation. That's cultural erasure on a global scale. Consequence 3. Weakening the incentive to innovate. Innovation thrives on recognition. When inventors feel their work will be credited and rewarded, they push further. But what happens when you keep seeing your country's ideas stolen, overshadowed, or claimed by others? The incentive drops. Rick Richardson admitted that after years of battling Microsoft, the process nearly broke him. The stress, the cost, the endless appeals, it's enough to make most inventors walk away. And when they do, the world loses potential breakthroughs. Consequence 4. A warning for the future. These cases aren't just history, they're a warning. In a globalized world, ownership of ideas is more contested than ever. Patents, trademarks, intellectual property, it's a battlefield. And countries that don't protect their innovations risk losing not just credit, but control. Australia has learned this the hard way. It's now far more aggressive in defending patents and branding. But the scars remain. Every Aussie inventor knows, if you don't lock it down fast, someone else, often in America, will. Lesson 1. Tell your story loudly. If there's one takeaway here, it's this. The world remembers the storyteller, not just the inventor. America has mastered the art of branding innovation. For Australia, and for any smaller nation, the lesson is clear. Inventing isn't enough. You've got to claim it, promote it, and make sure the world knows where it came from. Lesson 2. Fight early, fight hard. CSIRO proved that when you stand firm, even giants like Microsoft or Apple can be forced to pay. But those victories only came after years of legal battles. The lesson? Protect your patents and trademarks early, before others scale your idea globally. Lesson 3. Recognition matters as much as royalties. Yes, money is important, but history is priceless. When the world forgets who truly invented something, it robs not just the inventor, but the nation of pride and identity. Australia's inventions should be celebrated as global achievements, not footnotes buried under US branding. Quick question for you. Which do you think is more important, the money or the recognition? Would you rather your country earn billions quietly or be forever remembered as the true inventor? Drop your answer in the comments. And that brings us to the final piece of this story. Because when you put all of this together, the Wi-Fi wars, the Ugg boot battle, the fight with Microsoft, and the reasons behind America's dominance, there's one big question left. What does this mean for the future? And what should you, as a viewer, take away from all this? Let's wrap it all up in the conclusion. So here's the truth. Australia has given the world life-changing innovations. Wi-Fi, the black box flight recorder, Ugg boots, even everyday tools like the electric drill. But too often, America has stepped in, rebranded, scaled, and walked away with the credit. At first glance, it feels like just a fight over names or patents. But really, it's about power. Who gets to write history? Who gets remembered? And who gets forgotten? If Australia had been louder, faster, and more protective, maybe the world would be saying, "Thank you, Australia," every time they log onto Wi-Fi or slip into a pair of Uggs. Instead, too often, America's branding machine made those stories vanish. But here's the bigger question. How many other countries are facing the same thing right now? How many brilliant ideas are being overshadowed, not because they weren't great, but because the inventors didn't tell their story loud enough? That's the lesson here, not just for Australia, but for anyone watching. Innovation isn't just about inventing. It's about owning the narrative. If you don't, someone else will. And now I want to hear from you. Which Australian invention shocked you the most to learn wasn't recognized globally? Wi-Fi, the black box, Ugg boots, or something else entirely? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading every one. And hey, if you've made it this far, let me know by commenting "Wi-Fi is Aussie," so I know you're part of the curious ones who stay till the end. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden stories, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Because next time we're diving into more shocking truths about how the world's greatest ideas are born, stolen, and forgotten. Because sometimes history isn't written by the winners, it's written by the loudest.